All right. We're delighted you're back. And we had a wonderful time last night. Tony's got some new things up here. And Tony, you going to talk a little bit about that at some point tonight? Yeah, that'd be great. So a couple of quick things. How many of you, this may be your very first time with us? You just found out about the presentation. Anyone? I know we had a guest call me today and was hoping to come tonight, so was just checking to see if Kevin might be here. So as you came in tonight, you received this flyer called Tracing the Footsteps of Jesus. And Tony referred to that last night, and tonight we're going to begin to encourage you to think about if you want to come, to register for that. And so we'll be following up on that in just a moment. We're going to be doing the drawing just after I have Tony come up and and do a little bit of sharing about the upcoming series. And I've also got a question. So we're going to wait till kind of the last moment before he's up for his presentation to do tonight's drawing. Again, to qualify for that, you had to be here last night. And so I hope that someone is as delighted as Leo was last night. That was really great. That was amazing what happened there. So Tony, why don't you come on up? Let's talk a little bit about your series that I think is just exceptionally good, and that's Tracing the Footsteps of Jesus. You did a series on Paul first, and then close to 8 years or so later, something like that, you went back and produced this one. Is that right?
That's a great question. I think about 8 years later we started working on that one. We released The Footsteps of Paul in 2004 and The Footsteps of Jesus in 2012.
Okay. All right. So it took a little bit there. So you have this flyer. I'm going to hand it to Tony. So talk to us a little bit about what we can expect if we happen to decide to come to this.
Well, Tracing the Footsteps of Jesus. Well, let me do this. Let's talk about what's coming up here, and then I can help them to see that. So I think we have this on. So tomorrow night is actually a little different in the flyer. We're going to do Christmas Eve in the Holy Land. Now this is pretty exciting because I'm working on something really new. We're pitching a less religious presentation to commercial television about the birth of Jesus. And so we'll weave in stories about Cleopatra and Herod the Great's father and Antipater and Mark Antony. And anyways, I think you'll kind of enjoy it. And it sets the stage for the birth of Jesus. And then we'll do In the Footsteps of Jesus on Wednesday evening. It'll be like a pictorial essay going through the life of Jesus. And can I just say this? I made my first trip to the Bible lands in 1986. I had a 5-week course in archaeology. And I spent a week in Egypt and a week in Jordan before that, visiting with my friends doing a dig in Jordan. And then had 5 weeks there. And I met someone who was doing lectures on archaeology, and it got my mind going. And that's how I really got kind of immersed into this part of the world. And it became really exciting. Can I tell one more story?
Please. Actually, he's stealing my question I was going to do, so just go for it. Okay, go for it. My question was going to be, how did you become interested in knowing that God was calling you? So just go for it.
All right. So I'll never forget the first time that I walked down the Wadi Kelt. Any of you walked down the Wadi Kelt? The Wadi Kelt is the old road from Jerusalem to Jericho that Jesus would have walked. And it's this deep, deep canyon. And when you walk down it, it's just full of caves. And it was called the Way of Blood. And walking down that, it's only, about 15 miles, 20 miles from Jerusalem to Jericho. Yeah. On my tours we walk that, by the way.
Really?
Yeah, we'll walk about 12 miles. It's optional. You don't have to do it. You can sleep in that day if you want. But it's the most exciting part of the tour. But you're walking down, and there's all these caves, and you just imagine that there are robbers jumping out to kill people. That's where the story of the Good Samaritan happens. And so it happened in a real place. It was a really dangerous place, and so on. And so in this series, we'll be going to that. So how did the films come about? I was actually lecturing this series. I developed actually in 1995 maybe, and I had moved to California, and I had a youth pastor. I was a pastor in those days, and my youth pastor said, "You don't have to use slides." He was actually on tour with me, tracing the footsteps of Paul in Greece, Turkey, and Syria. "You don't have to make slides anymore. We can make movies." And I thought, that's why you're the youth pastor and I'm the senior pastor. You're very naive. We don't have money to make a movie. But we came back, and I'll never forget Pastor Ron. He made a 2-minute demo, and there was planes and maps and Indiana Jones music, and boom, I was teaching in Tarsus. in first century Tarsus. I thought, we can make movies. That's how the Footsteps of Paul developed. Footsteps of Jesus came out of that. A number of years later, we actually had 7 one-month film trips filming this over a 4-year period. So everything's filmed on location. So we walked down. Actually, that first time I went down the Wadi Khel, I thought, someday I'm going to tell this story. So we actually will be walking down the Wadi Khel as we tell the story of the Good Samaritan, the stories that Jesus told. So it's pretty exciting. And
so let me tell them a little bit about. Did you want to say some more about this?
Well, I just brought it up on the screen.
Okay.
So
all right.
There
are the topics. There are the presentations. So this will start next Friday evening. So we want to encourage you to go to the website on the card and register. And if you don't have easy access to a computer to do that, you can write on your card over the next 1 or 2 nights just the initials for Footsteps of Jesus and FS. What? My brain is dead tonight. Footsteps of Jesus, FSJ, okay?
Yeah, FOJ.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's how you're doing it, okay?
Yeah, FOJ.
All right, well, we'll go with his, all right? So, anyway, the reason we need to know that is we need to know if we have enough of the study guides.
And here's a picture of the study guides. The study guides are absolutely gorgeous.
They are.
And they're full color, and they're very in-depth. So we'll do the fullness of time on Friday night, and there's 7 episodes in Volume 1. And so you've asked me to come here and present Volume 1, and I'm excited to do that.
And we're excited you're going to be here. So just a quick recap here of the schedule. So we're going to start Friday night. We'll go Friday and Saturday night, same time, 7 o'clock. We'll skip Super Bowl Sunday. And then we're going to be back on Monday and finish
I doubt anyone's had any interest in the Super Bowl since the Seahawks are not in it.
I know, it's true. It's true.
I was so disappointed about coming up here and not having it. You know, I actually, the year the Ravens were in the Super Bowl, I was doing meetings in Baltimore, and everybody came with purple every night to the meetings. Ravens earrings and necklaces.
Well,
it was,
if they were in it, we'd probably see a lot of 12s around here.
I'm sure,
yeah.
and I was hoping to experience that. I'm
right.
disappointed.
So another year, maybe. That's what we always say. There's always another year, right? Okay. We used to say that a lot in Chicago when it came to the Cubs. Well, there's another year, and then finally it happened. So that was a good thing. So if you'd be so kind as to indicate, because we want to make sure we have enough study guides. That's the important thing. We need time to order more if we need more. So I think we're going to be okay on that, though. And Tony, you got some new things tonight?
Yes.
You want to talk about anything you got there?
Yes. We have some interesting implements of war. We have a sword here. It's kind of the Roman short sword, and so it's the length of your femur. And that's on the table. There's Pastor Ron, can come over here, I'll demonstrate. This is a Roman spear tip. It's very blunt and round, and so if you did that to somebody, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hit you that hard, really.
Sure you did.
I didn't mean to really hit it. Anyway, it would break your ribs. It wouldn't go, it would break your ribs, so to pierce the heart of Jesus really wouldn't work. Herod the Great developed a different type of spear, and it's kind of wide like that, but look at this. No, I won't do that. It's thin like that, and you can actually see it could go between the ribs, pierce the heart, and the blood would flow out. So very, very interesting. There's also an Asherah goddess up here. I hope I didn't pollute the church by bringing a goddess in here. But there's an Asherah goddess here, and so it's a fertility goddess. Sometimes you find these. I don't know if you found any on your side. I had a group of, I had an all-lady tour a number of years ago. And we were down in Beersheba, and they had cut a big trench across, and it was in May. And I said, you may find one of these potsherds. Don't buy stuff. Just, find one of these broken potsherds, and it's a couple thousand years old, and you can take it home, and so on. And so we'd been down there, and we got back, and the curator of an archaeological museum was coming by where I was staying, and so that afternoon, one of the ladies came out with a figurine, a headless figurine. And let's just say she was extremely well endowed. And she said, "What is that?" And he started laughing. And so in ancient times, if you were infertile, you would say, "May you be infertile, may you never have children. May your womb dry up and break off the head and throw it away." And then that would help you to be fertile and that one to be infertile, right? And there it had been for all those thousands of years. And just notice it's not on my table, so she was not a nice lady. Okay. No, just teasing. No. But anyway, that's a fertility goddess. So, and then there's an interesting coin up here. We'll talk tonight about Bar Kokhba. I'll have more coins out tomorrow night. But this is actually a Bar Kokhba coin. And so we'll talk about that. Very important in Jewish history and in the development of Judaism.
All right. Well, why don't we do the drawing? Shall we do that tonight? All right. I'm reminding myself that I needed to take the lamp out tonight. So first of all, I'm going to begin by showing the lamp that we're giving away tonight. Another little oil lamp. This one is the petiter size, all right? So that'll go to someone tonight. So we're going to have someone tonight right here on the front row, toward the second row here. Here we go tonight. Would you take that and just roll that over, grab the lids, and then just keep flipping it a couple of times, okay? Okay, very good. All right. Would you be willing to reach in here tonight and grab one? Okay. Okay. She's even going to stir them up a lot more. Okay. And I'm going to let you read the name.
I don't know how to read.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
No. Roger Adams.
Okay, Roger.
I think actually Mr. Oates is Nancy Eklund.
Oh, she thinks it actually said Nancy on there, but anyway. Okay. All right. So, I wouldn't know who Nancy Eklund is, but.
Wow, thank you. Take this one or this?
No, you can have that just as a way to keep it
There.
Thank you.
That looks almost more like a first century lamp, actually.
That's. Yeah.
She's a lamp specialist. You can ask her. Yeah.
All right.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
All right. So be sure tonight, as you leave, to turn in your registration card. Yeah, go ahead and give Roger a round of applause. That's good. I remember this back. How many of you remember when we had the draft for the military? Any of you get really good numbers in that, guys? All right. I was very fortunate. My number was 36, but it was the year that Nixon called off the draft. But I remember this one guy said, I never won anything, and he got number one in that draft. It's like, well, this is a good one to win, Roger. Okay, so I'd love to have Tony come and stand beside me this evening. I want to pray for him and all those of you that are here along with me tonight. Father, I want to thank you tonight for Tony. God, he's been such a blessing in my life over the years, and I've had the privilege of sharing his material many, many times. God, tonight I pray that you'd bless him as we take another trip into the Bible lands. And Lord, give us hearts to hear what you want to say to us. For we pray this in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
All right.
As I was working on a new series that we're pitching to commercial television, I'm thinking, what's our angle? And there's a wonderful line from a Dominican scholar who excavated in Jerusalem for many years called the Fifth Gospel. Have you heard of that? The Fifth Gospel? And he says there are 5 Gospels that tell the story of Jesus. 4 you'll find in books, and 1 you'll find in the land they call holy. Understand the 5th Gospel, that is the Holy Land, and the world of the 4 Gospels will open before you. And I thought, that's it. We'll call it mysteries of the 5th Gospel. Exposing the real Jesus. Exposing is a good word if you're a photographer, right? Bad word if you're a tabloid journalist. But anyway, the first episode in that series we're pitching to commercial television is Christmas Eve in the Holy Land. Would you like to see a little 45-second trailer on that? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to let you cue that up, Phil. Have a good sound inside. And so we're pretty excited about this and encourage you to pray that we can get this one onto television and people can hear about Jesus. Okay? I'm looking for the mysterious voice, by the way, to do some of this for me. And I had a group of people on the island of Patmos that had pastors from the Persian Gulf there the year before, and the tour guide was so bad, I just said, don't even give me a tour guide. And they said, well, just try this one. And this gal spoke with the most incredible voice. And afterward I said, what's the deal? And it turns out that she's from the island of Patmos, but she married a guy in the UK, so she's an actress half of the year. So I said, can you do some of our mysteries? And you can't tell if it's Bulgarian or Greek or what it is, what this voice is. But anyway, okay, we're ready to go. Here we go. That's kind of exciting, huh? And we're really excited about this. Encourage prayers as we're pitching it to the History Channel. That's where we like it to land. So anyway, we're going to do a material from that tomorrow night, and then on Wednesday night we'll do In the Footsteps of Jesus. So our schedule will be a little bit different than what's printed in your brochure, so just keep that in mind. But tonight we're going to talk about the Jew, the Arab, and Jerusalem, or better yet, oh, what did I do? That's my grandson. Okay. Phil, you're the IT specialist. What in the world did I do? I pushed some button here on my remote. Huh? Oh, okay. All right.
That's a great picture, though, isn't it?
My favorite, yes. So, the Jew, the Christian, the Muslim, and Jerusalem. So many Arabs are Christian. Matter of fact, at one point, the majority of Bethlehem was Christian. Now they're about 20%. At one point it was 90% of Ramallah, which is kind of the head of the Palestinian area today, and now it's about 20%. So most of the Christians have connections in other part of the world. And to be honest, in Israel, the Israeli government sides with Muslims over Christians, the indigenous Christians there. So often the Christians feel under attack and they immigrate away. And so the Bible lands are being emptied, really, of Christians as they go to America or Europe or South America. But many of them are Christian, but they speak Arabic, so they're called Arab-speaking Christians. So we're going to look tonight at the great city of Jerusalem and explore that. So Jerusalem has tremendous significance for millions of people. As a matter of fact, nearly 4 billion people, over half the world, trace their spiritual roots to the city of Jerusalem. And that's so exciting. Well, it's long been divided into 4 quarters: the Jewish quarter, the Christian quarter, the Muslim quarter, and the Arab quarter, and the Armenian quarter. And so it's an exciting city to go to. You can see people being drawn. There's spiritual attraction being drawn there. Now, Israel can't boast the pyramids that we looked at on Saturday night, like Egypt can, or the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, or the Acropolis of Greece, but there's only one land that lays claim to the title, Holy Land, Holy Land. And so this land is a sacred epicenter for the 3 monotheistic religions. It draws pilgrims with an irresistible force to this city. Christians, Jews, Muslims, they come here. It means, Jerusalem means city of peace, yet few cities have been subject to more war or bloodshed. Look at this. This is the Zion Gate. Those are not mothball holes. Those are bullet holes from the 1948 war and the 1967 war. But that's only the wars in the 20th century, right? We can think about how many times it's been besieged by Egyptians and Assyrians and by Babylonians and by Persians and Greeks and Romans. And we go on. Arabs, Seljuks, Crusaders, Mamelukes, Ottomans, British, Jordanians, and now the Israelis in charge again. And so it means city of peace, but it's been fought over so many times. In addition to the multiple conquests, it's been destroyed 3 times. Once by the Babylonians in 586, and twice by the Romans, 70 AD, and then again in 135 AD. And so it is a tremendous city. A city set on a hill, yes, but a city that it draws people. Now, we're not used to walled cities in America, but the walls of Jerusalem have been very important throughout time. And when you get there for the first time, that's what you notice. You see that walled city going around. Jerusalem has these gates. Coming from a new land like America, we don't need it in a time of mortar shells and missiles and aerial combat. But throughout the centuries, these walls have been important to Jerusalem's defense and protection. In 1989, I had my 10-year-old son with me and a colleague and his son, and we were visiting with these Palestinian shepherds one evening right near the Jaffa Gate. They had their sheep there. We were chatting with them, and we got up and we walked across the Hinnom Valley over toward the King David Hotel. I didn't have the privilege of staying in the King David Hotel, but where I was staying was across the street. So walked across and we heard, "Ba-da-da-da-da-da!" And my friend said, "Oh, fireworks." And I said, "No, Uzi, machine gun." I said, "You take the boys and go to the room. I'm going back to see what happened." And so I went back over, and while I was there, I discovered that a zealot, this happened to be a Jewish zealot, came by and emptied 2 clips into the Palestinian shepherds that we'd just been visiting with. The next day, I shot this picture of the blood on the walls. One was killed and several were wounded. And I thought how things had changed since my earlier trip a couple of years earlier. It was called the Intifada, the uprising. And so there was an uprising in Jerusalem and in the land of Israel to overthrow the government. Well, there are 8 gates that go into Jerusalem. This is a closed gate. This is the Golden Gate. And so it's one of the 2 gates that faces to the east. Many people believe the Messiah will come through that gate. Now, this gate actually, in that part of the wall, that gate is actually Ottoman, but down below it, a colleague of mine actually fell through that, fell down into the earlier gate that was down below it, and he got a few pictures before they came and hurriedly closed all that up. But it's called the Golden Gate. So many people believe Messiah will come through that gate. Just to the north of it, on the east side, is this gate. It's called St. Stephen's Gate, or the Lion's Gate. You can kind of see those embossed lions there. And it's the gate that most of the Muslims are going to come through when they're going to the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And so there's another gate as you come around to the north. This gate is called Herod's Gate, also called the Flower Gate because of that embossed flower over it. And so it's very interesting. The Damascus Gate is the main gate for the markets and for the Arab East Jerusalem. And so you can see the folk going here. You'll also see the Jewish people going through this gate as they're going from the Mia Sharim going down to the Temple Mount, to the Western Wall. And so a lot of activity here. This gate actually is a Hadrian Gate from the 2nd century. It's part of a triple gate. And if you go there and you're not with me, you can look down below all that and you'll see the triple gate from the 2nd century down below it. This gate in that part of the wall actually is Ottoman from the 16th century. Suleiman the Magnificent, not Solomon. This is the New Gate, and the New Gate was opened in the late 19th century to give Christians access to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And so it's kind of right across from Notre Dame. So the French had that open. This is the Jaffa Gate. It's the main gate for the tourists going to Jerusalem today. And so it kind of connects Jewish Jerusalem, you might say, western Jerusalem into the old city. And it kind of comes at the top of it. You can make your way down to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre or on down to the Western Wall. And so it's great access. As you come around to the south, you come to the Zion Gate. We talked about that earlier. It's been cleaned, very nice today, but you can still see they haven't repaired it. They've left the bullet holes there as a reminder. This is the Dung Gate. You know what that gate is for? To take the dung out. Of course, that was not a gate in Jesus' day right there. It was a whole different lay of the land, but it is right by the temple, so they call it the Dung Gate because it goes out to hell. You know what hell is? Gehenna. The valley of Hinnom is hell. And that's where it goes. So they take the dung from the animals or the carcasses and they take them down, they'd burn them, and that's where we get this idea of hell being a place of burning. Well, I have to tell you, I've spent a couple of years in Jerusalem and I still get lost whatever gate I go through. So don't feel bad, but it's wonderful to wind. If you've been there, you know what I'm talking about, to wind through the shops and to enjoy the streets, to talk to the shopkeepers. Whatever gate you choose to enter, you go into just kind of a different world. It's actually a living city, and so as I said, the 4 quarters earlier, people live there, so there's markets for them, as well as so there's a lot of fruit markets and spice markets and clothing bazaars, as well as those trying to sell trinkets to tourists. Back in 1989, I had to run out of the Damascus Gate with my son and my colleague and his son because of tear gas. I'd never experienced tear gas before, but they fired off the tear gas, and we went gasping for air and ran out. When we were filming the Paul series in 2001, we were actually rocked by one of the bus bombs there while we were there that night, and of the uprising of the Second Intifada. So the city of peace, and yet it hasn't really lived up to that. Now, I'm not trying to scare you because it's actually very safe, I believe, there now. I would take my grandchildren, whom I love very much, with me there and wouldn't think twice about it today. So it's very, very safe. Things seem to be much more under control. But there's no market I would rather be than the old souk of Old Jerusalem. The color, the smells, the sounds, the shopkeeper who begs you, to buy his goods, that soft hello, invites you to come in, sit down and sip tea, mint tea or regular tea, and none of the most iron-willed will leave without buying something. Whether it's Bedouin garments or Bethlehem inlaid boxes, it's just so many things to stop and buy. Do you like baklava? I love baklava. In this part of the world, they don't make it with walnuts, they make it with pistachios. And I've eaten many a kilo, as you can tell. This guy, however, was making some kind of a pancake. I bought a kilo of that and fed it to the birds. It wasn't too good. But the fruits and vegetables are always so abundant no matter what time of year. Look at those gorgeous eggplant, huh? Right there inside the Damascus Gate, and here are the little vendors for the fruits and vegetables. This was a Bedouin lady. I encountered her. She was kind of funny. She had a roving store. She carried her store on her head and had her scale in her blouse. She could stop at a moment's notice and she could weigh out oranges. But I did notice she had two prices, one for me and one for everyone else. Yes. The sights and sounds of the spice and coffee market. If you've been there, you know what I'm talking about. It's just so rich. Here's my good friend. We actually did some filming for that Mysteries of the Fifth Gospel. Isn't that gorgeous? The za'atar he's got. But being a vegetarian, I always end up here for some reason. Can't figure that one out. The meat market. Well, anyway, within the old city is the Via Dolorosa, the 14 stations of the cross from the Latin church and the holiest sites within Christendom. And so tonight I want to share that with you. And within the old city we have the Western Wall where Jews come and they pray and remember the temple that was built on top of the platform above. This is actually a structural wall holding up the platform that the temple used to rest upon. And then of course it's holy for Muslims because of the Dome of the Rock. They believe that Muhammad came here in a night vision or journey. He came here in a dream and went to heaven from this. And so it became the holiest place in the Muslim world. Today it's the third holiest place after Mecca and Medina where the Prophet was born and died. So all three of these religions look back to Jerusalem as the city of the faithful, the person of Abraham, because this is where Abraham brought his son Isaac to Mount Moriah, okay? And so this is kind of the center. So this evening, before we get too deep, I thought we might look and see how all of these three religions look back to one common ancestor, one common story, in what Christians call the Old Testament or Jews would call the Hebrew Scriptures. And so we go down and we look at Hebron. This is actually the cenotaph. A cenotaph is a kind of a monument for Abraham. Here's the one for Sarah. Remember Abraham, the only thing Abraham owned in all the promised land was a grave for his wife. What went by just then was the cenotaphs of Isaac and Rebekah. So he bought that, he buried his wife there, he was buried there, Isaac was buried there, Rebekah was buried there, Jacob was buried there, and Leah was buried there. Because Rachel died on the way down near Bethlehem, right? So here we have the six patriarchs, the three patriarchs and three matriarchs buried. King Herod built this building, the only building of King Herod still standing, over the cave of Machpelah with the patriarchs and matriarchs inside. And so it's a pretty special place to go to. There's a Jewish synagogue there. The Jewish now have access only to the side of Jacob and Leah. And then on the other side, the Muslims have access to Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, and Rebekah. And that's used to be kind of intermingled, but in 1994, a Jewish doctor from Brooklyn went over and he took a gun and he killed 29 people worshiping. So now it's one of the most divided places you can go to. It's one of the highest security places I've ever been to go in. And we've been able to get in, fortunately, and get nice footage for our films. And so it's a place that goes back in time. Herod the Great, again, building this beautiful monument over it. Here you can kind of see some of the security and what you've got to get through to get in. They keep a strict separation today between the Jewish and the Muslim worshipers. Here you can actually see where some of the bullets ricocheted off of some of the columns and so on. And so this was a very sad time. Well, Abraham settled in Beersheba, south of Hebron in the Negev. Here he dug a well. And this is an example of a well that he dug. And he formed a peace treaty with the locals. And Abraham was a nomad. He was a Bedouin. And so he lived in a tent, and he could move with his tribe. And we just actually finished, we're just wrapping up a series called The World of the Patriarchs. I've been spending a lot of time with Abraham lately. in editing and writing. And Abraham basically had a range. He would go from Dothan in the north, up by modern Shechem or Nablus, and he'd go all the way down south of Beersheba. So he'd go from where they get about 27 inches of rain down to where they get about 2 inches of rain. And then he'd go back up. So he's a nomad going up and down the mountain areas. And yet over half of the world today trace their spiritual roots to a nomadic shepherd named Abraham. Isn't that amazing? Wow. Well, he had a goat hair tent. Now, goat hair tents are interesting because they developed a special type of goat in the Taurus Mountains in the Roman province of Cilicia. And some of you from the medical field know that cilia means hair, so it's the Roman province of hair. And they developed a special goat grown nowhere else in the world. And when you took that goat hair and you would weave it, it would let smoke from your campfire go out, sunshine stream through, and it would repel rain. It was the Gore-Tex fabric of the day. I'm sure people around here would have had it. I see everybody with Patagonia and all these other nice fabrics because of the rain, right? It was one outlet for 200 miles to the Mediterranean. It's at Tarsus. And what was Saul of Tarsus? The Apostle Paul, a tent maker. I wonder, did he make tents or did he purvey Gore-Tex? Because wherever he went in the ancient world, he had the best connections in the ancient world for goat hair to make tents. As a matter of fact, that's what I believe his family probably provided tents to Mark Antony and the Roman army that was based in Tarsus, the Eastern Roman army. And maybe that's how his father became a citizen. Because remember, Paul said, remember what the guy said? How much did you pay for your? I was born a citizen, right? Something unusual had happened. Well, anyway, during my second visit to the Bible lands, 1989, my son and I went down and we actually slept in the tel, and that was kind of an experience. And I got up early before sunrise because I wanted to visit the Bedouin, understand better the life of Abraham. And you could see the sheep coming down the wadi and the camels coming down the wadi and a couple of cows here and there. And they're passing by, and I left my son sleeping there. And I got down, and I came upon this family. And this family, they were washing their sheep to prepare them for the shearing. So this is in May, and so there was a bit of water. You can see the brother and the sister, the younger kids, trying to get these reluctant sheep in, pulling them by the ears and the hair, trying to get them in. They don't want a bath, obviously, but they're trying to get them in to wash them. And then you can see the older brothers are washing, and then finally it goes under the view of the father. He says, okay, and then you can try and see the soggy animal there trying to get out. Barely can get out. But anyway, this is the world of Abraham. This is the world of Isaac and Jacob and the sons. I went back to look for my son, and he had gotten up and wandered down into the valley himself. He made friends with this Bedouin boy. The Bedouin boy let him ride a camel around. And then it was Stephen's turn to watch the animals, and the Bedouin boy rode. And so they couldn't speak the same language, but they could speak the same language, couldn't they? Children playing, how wonderful. Well, Beersheba, the tale does not really go back to the time of Abraham, but this is the area. Beersheba means the well of the seven, or the well of the oath, going back to a covenant or oath that Abraham made with Abimelech. And so it's very special to go there. He built a well, and he planted a tamarisk tree, and there at the tell they built that tamarisk tree, and so it's pretty nice to go and visit that. Well, remember last night we talked about the Nuzi tablets, and we talked about how the Nuzi tablets talked about the Mesopotamian custom that if a woman did not have a child, she could choose a suitable surrogate for her husband to have relations with, and then that child would become her child. And so when God had said it won't be Eliezer, but it'll come from you, Abraham, somehow they came up with a plan to do this. And I'm going to talk about this weekend if you're able to come here. The church pastor has asked me to share, and I thought we'd share some stories about this weekend on Saturday morning. But anyway, it's a fascinating experience. Won't get into that too much tonight, except to ask you the question, who would choose a surrogate? The wife. And so she went looking for the most beautiful woman, right? Probably not. As a matter of fact, who did she choose, by the way? Egyptian. Where do you think she got the Egyptian slave from? Probably given when Abraham got a dowry for her. Well, I'm telling too much. I'm going to talk about that on Saturday morning and from our new series. But anyway, it's fascinating. So we can kind of see this playing out, and we can see how that Sarah and Hagar, there's a tension because Hagar gets pregnant, and it's not really a very good relationship. And so remember what Hagar does? She runs away. Do you know what Hagar means in Arabic? Flight. Run away. She runs away, right? And God says, no. And what happens? Most amazing thing happens. God appears to her there, hears her cry, and tells her to go back to Abraham and to name the boy Ishmael, meaning God hears because I've heard your prayer. And then the most amazing thing happens after that. God will ultimately, when she runs away, appear to her and reveal himself this time as El Roi, the God who sees. Do you know she's the only person in Scripture, the only woman at least, to give God a name? Was Ishmael. But anyway, we'll explore some of those things this weekend. So she called to the Lord El Roi, you are the God who sees me. She returns to the camp where she gave birth to a son that was named Ishmael. So it's fascinating, isn't it? Well, you can imagine the tension that goes on in the camp between this, because Sarah has her son, her adopted son, her stepson now, that's her son, but is not too happy with the situation. And then the angel comes and says, no. You're going to have one through your wife, Sarah. And she becomes pregnant. Remember what happens? Isaac is born, and then there's the weaning, and then something goes on, and anyway, I won't get into all those details, but ultimately Sarah says, get this gal out of here with that boy. And God says, yeah, Abraham, it's tough for you, but you're going to do that. And so they leave, and we can see this tearful departing. And so Ishmael grows up. Well, she's lost and she's afraid, and the Lord again appears to her and says, your son is not going to die. I'm going to make him into a great nation. So Ishmael became the father of the 12 rulers. The Arab people trace their lineage back to Ishmael. Jewish people are descendants of Abraham through Isaac and the line of Jacob and Judah. And so we can see them. We can see those nice curls and so on. Last night we talked about the Edomites. And who were the Edomites? Descendants of Esau. And these Edomites was Jacob's twin. They're living down in Edom, the land of Edom, Petra, and Mount Seir in this area. And so that's the twin. There's another family. Remember, he came with Lot, his nephew. And Lot ultimately has, what does he have? Sons or grandsons? Both. And their names, do you remember their names? Moab and Ammon. And what's the capital of modern Jordan today? Amman. And one of the principal cities is Madaba, Moab. So this comes from the father. And so what I'm trying to say is all these people are related. They all trace back to Abraham. They all trace back to Abraham. So Isaac and Ishmael, they come together to bury their father Abraham. They seem to have gotten along okay, but their descendants seem to have had a lot of stress and strain through the centuries, and they have animosities that run extremely deep. Well, the Bible says God told Abraham, he's trying to reveal to Abraham what he's not like. He's not like the other nations. Take your son and offer him on Mount Moriah. And so he took his only son Isaac, the one he loved, up to Mount Moriah to offer him. And then God says, don't do it now. I know that you love me, for you've not withheld from me your only son. According to Muslim tradition, by the way, it is Ishmael that is taken not to Jerusalem, but is taken instead to Saudi Arabia, to Mecca, to be offered. And according to the Samaritans, Mount Moriah is actually in Shechem at Mount Gerizim. So kind of interesting, but the Bible actually will later say in 2 Chronicles, Mount Moriah in Jerusalem, so we know that is where it's at. Well, Jay, remember when Abraham, he went up and there were some Babylonian kings, they came from Babylon and they came down, they attacked the cities where Lot was dwelling, and Abraham chased them all the way up to Dan, a long ways away, captured them, got Lot back, and he came back by and he stopped at Salem. Remember we talked about Salem last night? And he paid tithe to Melchizedek, the priest king of Salem. And so Jerusalem becomes very important because of that. Well, when Joshua comes into the land, they conquer Jerusalem, and it's a Canaanite city, a walled Canaanite city, but they don't occupy it. So the Jebusites who are living there, they come back and they occupy it. And then David decides that he wants to unite the north and south part of the land, and so he kind of goes here into the middle, and he wants to use Jerusalem as a capital, but the problem is it's a fortified city. And so the Jebusites inside begin to taunt them. You will not get in here. Even the blind and the lame can ward you off. Well, that's quite a boastful statement, isn't it? They were overly confident. So David said on that day, anyone who conquers the Jebusites will have to use the water shaft to reach those lame and blind who are David's enemies. Here's the problem. The water was outside the walls. There was only one spring. It's called the Gihon, the crazy spring, the gushing spring. Kind of flows and it doesn't flow and goes back and forth. So they call it a crazy spring outside the walls of the city. So the Jebusites had built a sloping tunnel down in the rock so they could go out to a place where they could actually drop their bucket down through a shaft into the spring, and they wouldn't have to go outside to get their water in case enemies came. And so here, this might help you to see. Here we can see the city of Jerusalem. Sorry, this pointer doesn't work very well on that screen, but you can kind of see the little red area. That's the city of David. That's called Mount Ophel. That's Jerusalem. So Jerusalem's not a really big city archaeologically when David and Solomon are there. And then David will take the threshing floor of Ammon up here on the top, and they will build his palace there and the temple up there. But let's see if I can go in a little closer. Can you see where I've got it circled? That's the Gihon Spring. It's outside the walls. So they dig this tunnel to go underneath, and then they go out and they can drop their bucket down and bring the water in without having to go outside. Pretty good, right? So David says the only way we can get in is if somebody scales this shaft, comes inside the city and opens the gates, and then we can come in and conquer. That's exactly what they did. So later on, King Hezekiah will be confronted with the Assyrians. Now, the Assyrians are the bad guys of ancient history. They worshipped Ashur, the god of war. They come from like Mosul in Iraq, and so Saddam was saying there's a poster child, and Al-Qaeda's a poster child. These guys worshipped war. And so when they would come in, they would actually take the leaders and flay them alive. That means they would cut their skin off and hang it on, they would stick you on, they would impale you. They're the rough guys of history. So they have a problem. And so Hezekiah is a spiritual guy. He believes in prayer, Pastor Ron, so he has a revival, but he also believed in works. So he decided we got to do something to secure the water source. So notice what he did. Here he builds a tunnel, and I'm walking through it. It's called Hezekiah's Tunnel. He digs this tunnel under the ground to bring the water from that crazy spring outside the walls inside the city. And the bad guys are coming, so they're actually having to go both ways. And if you've had the privilege of walking through that, whenever I take people through, I say, you can feel the pick marks. They're going this way, but they're not just going this way. They're coming this way too because the bad guys are coming. And they actually miss each other. There's a little overlap in the rock, but they can hear each other, and they ultimately connect it, and the water starts flowing. And so you can actually feel the pick marks where I'm doing that. And you can see how they're coming both directions because the bad guys are coming. And they're going to flay you alive. Well, there's a wonderful inscription that was found. I got to not tell stories because time marches on. But anyway, there's a wonderful story about how this inscription was found by Horatio Spafford's adopted children. I've told you now. You remember Horatio Spafford? Yeah. His wife and the daughters were on a boat going across the Atlantic. They ran into a steel ship and the boat went down. The daughters were lost. Mom was saved. She sends a telegram, come to England quickly, all is lost. He's on the boat and he's going across and he tells the captain, tell me where it happened. And he wrote the poem, It Is Well With My Soul. They don't have any kids. So they moved to Jerusalem. They start the American colony. I just stayed in the American Colony Hotel with a family in November or October. They started the American colony in Jerusalem, and they began to adopt children. And one of their children found this inscription. Today it's in the Istanbul Museum, but there's a replica in the Israel Museum. And it actually confirms the biblical story. Here's what it says. When the tunnel was driven through, while we were still axe each man toward his fellow, and while there were still 3 cubits, that's 4.5 feet, to be cut through, there was heard the voice of a man calling to his fellow, for there was an overlap in the rock. Bad guys are coming. They're coming from both directions. They miss each other by 5 feet, but they can hear each other. And when the tunnel was driven through, the quarrymen hewed the rock, each man toward his fellow, axe against axe, and the water flowed from the spring toward the reservoir for 1,200 cubits, or 1,800 feet, toward the reservoir, and the height of the rock above the heads of the quarrymen was 100 cubits, or 150 feet. So they're 150 feet underground. Sometimes they're inside the city and outside, they're all over, but they get it all connected, and it came out into a pool. It's called the Pool of Siloam, and now they had water inside the city. And that's not very impressive, because this is actually the Crusaders and the Byzantines built a church there. But this is the same pool that Jesus told the blind guy, remember, go down and wash your eyes in the Pool of Siloam, and he was healed. And so I used to get there and I think, man, this is really a strange thing. But it's because the churches were built there. But recently they were doing some work down at the bottom, and look what they found. They found the huge Herodian Pool of Siloam. Mammoth. Here's actually an artist depiction of how big the Pool of Siloam was. And now they've actually found what's called a cardo. Remember, you have the cardiovascular, you got that main artery going up and down, and so they called it the cardo. There's another cardo now that actually went from the temple all the way down, so you get water from that and go back up to the temple. Hezekiah also built a broad wall, because now people are coming from all the towns and villages fleeing into the city of Jerusalem. And he builds this broad wall, 25 feet high. And he builds it so people can come in. And today they have found it when they excavated, when the Jewish quarter was destroyed in 1967. They excavated it down. They found this Hezekiah's wall and all these different things. And then they built shops and houses above all of that. Here you can see kind of a pit. It goes down about another 25, 30 feet, because Jerusalem is just full of valleys. Full of valleys. Well, the Assyrians, as I talked about earlier, swarmed out of modern Iraq. They conquered Israel in the north. It became the Assyrian province of Samaria. And then they come down and they are attacking in Judah. And they, remember we talked about Ostraca last night, that pottery when Staples is gone, and there's no Staples anymore, no office supply depots. They started writing on pottery. And they're doing signal fires because the Assyrians were attacking a place called Azekah. And just notice what one of the Ostraca says here from the British Museum. And may my Lord know that we are watching for the fire signals of Lachish according to all the signs which my Lord arranged, for we can no longer see the signals of Azekah, i.e., they bit the dust. And now the Assyrians come over to Lachish. Sennacherib with his war machine has come. He goes back and he puts all these panels in his palace there in Assyria. And we can kind of see the siege machines. Can you see the siege machines? Siege machines going up. They do something very interesting, by the way. They capture Jewish slaves, and they have the Jewish slaves build the ramps going up to knock into the city. And the Jews inside won't kill the Jews outside, and so they just sit there watching until they get overwhelmed. And they overtake the city. But then he comes to Jerusalem, and God works a miracle. Remember? Faith and work. They're praying with Isaiah, but they're working and building walls and building the water to come in. And he can't take it, so he goes back home and he writes and says, Hezekiah the Jew was shut up like a bird in his royal cage in Jerusalem, but it was sour grapes because he couldn't conquer the city. So 100 years later, the Babylonians come. A guy named Nebuchadnezzar comes down from Babylon, and he attacks the city. This is a city at that time, and breaks in. They actually found a nice seal from Jeremiah's secretary right in this area. And the city surrenders in 605. Daniel and the princes are taken back to Babylon to be re-educated. And a number of years ago, they had actually excavated this Israelite tower. And what was special about it was this. It's no longer open to the public, but those are Babylonian spearheads from Nebuchadnezzar's army when they conquered Jerusalem on an ash layer. Isn't that pretty cool? I guess what I'm trying to say is these stories really happened, and that's what the archaeology of Jerusalem tells us. Well, the Persians allowed the Jews to return in 515 BC. They were quite kind and let them go back and build their city. The next guy who interacts with them is Alexander the Great. He comes and Josephus describes how that he became a patron of the Jews, and maybe the Jews shared some prophecies about his rise. And then one of his successors, Antiochus Epiphanes, who was ruling out of a place called Antakya or Antioch in Syria, he's not so kind. He wants everybody in this realm to worship one god, Olympian Zeus, and to sacrifice pigs. So they go down and they say, we want you to sacrifice a pig. Well, Jews aren't going to sacrifice a pig because that's an unclean animal, right? And so there's a priest by the name of Matthias, and he says, I'm not going to sacrifice that. This other priest says, well, I'll do it. And so you know what Matthias does? He takes his sword, boom, boom. He kills the Syrian emissary, and he kills the priest, and he gets his boys, and he runs out into the wilderness, and he starts hammering on these Greeks. That's what Maccabee means, is hammer. Judas Maccabees would be his son. And so that's the Maccabean period. Okay? But anyway, we're going to go on from there. Well, the Maccabeans give way to an Edomite. We'll talk about him tomorrow night. Herod the Great comes in. Herod is an Edomite. He's not Jewish, and yet he's made the king of the Jews. Fascinating story. We'll talk about how that happened. And he ushers in a peace and prosperity for the land. But Jewish people don't like to say the name Herod because he wasn't Jewish. But this is the greatest time of Jerusalem's history through the centuries. The rabbis didn't like Herod very much, but they were forced to say, he who has not set eyes upon the structure of Herod has not seen a structure of beauty in all of his life. So Herod now remodels the temple in Jerusalem. He can't make it bigger, but he can make it better. And so he covers it with marble and fills it with gold. And by the way, he can make the plaza bigger. He can expand. He'll double the size of the plaza. He'll make it the largest man-made gathering place in the ancient world. Cover over 1 million square feet. It would be 3 times larger than the Esplanade of Athens at the Acropolis. Okay? And he does this by building these structural walls underneath, and so he doubles the size of it. It's fascinating. It's estimated that over 200,000 people could congregate there. So today we can go down, and this is the Tripian Valley. We can go down and we can see these stones. Here's one that's about 36 feet long. There's some longer ones down closer because this is still about 75 feet or 70 feet down to bedrock where I'm walking right now. So they have these huge stones, but behind it it's hollow. There are arches underneath, okay? And so he makes it the largest man-made gathering place in the ancient world. Here's a southwestern corner, by the way. The devil was probably pointing up to that as a place to throw yourself down, but we'll talk about that later. I'm going up the southern stairs. Jesus would have entered into the temple through this. Today there's a closed up triple gate, but you can see some of the Herodian stones down at the bottom, and this is on bedrock where I'm walking right in there. And what's important about this is called the Huldah gate or the mole gate. That's the gate Jesus would have gone into the temple through, okay? He'd have gone in through this gate. Quite exciting. And so all this is bedrock going from the city of David on up to the other. And then they would come out here in this little place. They would follow the stairs up the rock, and then they come out here, and this would be the court of the Gentiles, And that's why Jesus was a little upset with Annas, because he had brought animals in and he was selling them there in the court of the Gentiles. We can look here in this little model, and we can see 2 big bridges, and these bridges actually allowed the wealthier people to come out of the temple, go down that first bridge, and the second bridge is actually a causeway for the priests and for the king to be able to go to the upper city. Today, we see them as Wilson and Robinson's Arch. That, by the way, is one big rock going all the way across. That was where the bridge would go out, and then they come around and would tie in, as you can see here, and people could access the temple in that way. So it's called the Tripian Valley, and that valley runs right down to that pool of Siloam, as you can see. Well, they've excavated some priestly mansions. This is a priestly mansion. Might be, I personally believe it's perhaps Herod's first palace, very likely where Herod Antipas judged Jesus. And they found a lot of kosher instruments in there. I love the mosaic floor there, the rug of the day. They found a very interesting menorah in the wall. Since this is a priestly house, it's very different than the one on Titus's Arch in Rome, so probably more like that. Herod also made this fortress here. It's called the Tower of Antonia. named after Mark Antony. And so that was the weakest part. You know, the three sides of the Temple Mount have very, very, very deep valley, very, very deep sides going down into the valleys. The north didn't, so he actually put the Tower of Antonia, a big fortress there to protect it. Probably the most secure building in the ancient world was the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, done by Herod. And again, we can kind of see how the water would come down to the Pool of Siloam down at the bottom. Here you can see the upper city, and that was a wealthier city. And then Herod the Great built his big palace up by the Jaffa Gate, or the modern Jaffa Gate, up in that area. This is a Kidron Valley here, and the brook Kidron goes down to the Dead Sea. It flows down. You can see the temple over to the east. Over to the west was the Mount of Olives. We can see some different buildings down there, like the Tomb of Absalom. We'll talk about that a little bit more on Wednesday night. This is Hell. This is the Valley of Hinnom, or Gehenna. And Gehenna's been turned into a park. And I'll never forget being there during the Second Intifada, and hell was burning again. There was actually Arabs who were protesting burning tires on Shabbat and making a scene. But this is the Valley of Hinnom. So we have these three major valleys in Jerusalem. As we go down into the bottom, we kind of have Gethsemane. And so here we can see the traditional Garden of Gethsemane. It's called the Church of All Nations. This is a Roman Catholic or Latin church. By the way, the Latin church comes during the Crusades. They're not there in the early centuries. They come really 11th, 12th, 13th century. And so, but they come and they have this beautiful garden. They have these ancient trees that are there. We'll talk a little bit more about trees on Wednesday night. But I love being on the Mount of Olives. You can see the Mary Magdalene Church there. It's a Russian Orthodox church. And it's just full of churches over on the Mount of Olives commemorating so many stories about Jesus. Up on the top, there was a church that commemorated, was actually built by Helena, the mother of Constantine, commemorating the prophecy of the destruction of Jerusalem. That's not a popular topic today. So they've changed it, and now they call it the Lord's Prayer Church. The Pater Noster has the Lord's Prayer in over 140 languages. There's English and Greek and Hebrew. And I'm part Cherokee, and my last name is Morse. I like that one. Had both of those together, so I got my picture by it. And so it actually commemorates that. But my favorite church is really this one here. I love this church because it's called Dominus Flavit, the Lord wept. And it commemorates Jesus weeping over the city of Jerusalem. And so I spend a lot of time there because it gives this incredible view. And just imagine that the Dome of the Rock is not there, but the Jewish temple is there, so you're looking almost straight across. And Jesus is weeping over Jerusalem. And when you look closely, Antonio Barcioli built this, the Italian architect, in the shape of a tear. You see it? And I don't have it out, but I'll put them out tomorrow night. There are let me see if I'm going closer. There are 4 tear jars on the 4 corners of the church. See them? To commemorate Jesus weeping over Jerusalem. I was good friends with the brother. He was from Santa Barbara there, and I used to get special treatment. And I would have tour groups there. He'd come and talk to us, and we'd be able to have a special time. We weren't doing masses, but do that. We also I call it the chicken church because of this mosaic. Remember that? What happens here? Remember what Jesus said? "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you are not willing." And then he added the line, "Look, your house is left to you desolate." Matthew 23, 37, and 38. Always before he said, "My Father's house," but this time he doesn't say, "My Father's house." Your house. That's the last time he'll be in the Jewish temple. Well, he walks across and goes over to the other side, and he told another story, and I'll put these coins out tomorrow night. I should have done it tonight. Remember, he tells a story about a lady. What kind of a lady was she? A widow, and how that she put in 2 little coins. I'll show you coins that are pretty great coins. There's one coin up here tonight, but a denarius is a day's wage, and the mite is called the lepton, or the thin one. It's the thinnest coin made, 128 of them in 1 day's wage. She puts in 2, a 64th of a day's work. And remember what Jesus said? She has given more than all the rest. Well, the disciples are thinking about that, you know. I kind of relate to them. They're kind of left-brained, you know. And they're saying, "Lord, you may be a good teacher, but, you know, you don't know finance." You know, this takes a lot of money to run this. So they get to the other side, perhaps right over where that church is, on that side. They're looking across, and they said, Lord, look, what massive stones, what magnificent buildings. It takes a lot to keep this place going. And Jesus stuns them by telling them, the time is coming when this place will be taken apart stone by stone. He goes on to say they will not leave one stone upon another. They're shocked. They assume something as cataclysmic as that must be the end of the world. So they ask for signs, and so Jesus goes on. He gives them this cryptic sign. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, you will know its desolation is near. Then let those in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those in the city get out. And let those in the country not enter the city. Counterintuitive. Remember what I said happened in the days of Hezekiah? People were fleeing from the towns and villages into Jerusalem. Jesus says, when you see him come and surround the city this time, don't you flee into Jerusalem, you flee from Jerusalem. You go over to where my friend is digging over in Jordan. You leave, you go to, and we believe that all the believers in Jesus do. So what happened? Well, let's explore it. Zealots. Wish we had time to talk about Messiah in the first century. In the series we're going to start, when I start working on that series, Pastor Ron, I've written 4 keys from the 5th gospel, 4 things I didn't know before I started working. I didn't understand Jewish thinking about Messiah in the first century. And so this guy Matthias, he represents Jewish thinking about that. There's another guy, his name is Yehuda. You ever hear of Yehuda? Yehuda of Gamla, as Judas the Galilean in the book of Acts. His grandson goes to Masada, kills the Roman soldiers, steals the weapons in AD 66, marches into Jerusalem as the Messiah. Yeah. He's such a rascal. He's so terrible, they end up killing him. But that launches the war with the Romans. So the Romans retaliate. Cestius Gallus comes down from Antioch in Syria, and he surrounds the city, and then for some reason, I don't know why, he withdraws. And you know what the people in Jerusalem said? God's with us! They chase out after him, they leave the gates open. And what did Jesus say? When you see them surround the city, then it's time to leave. And every believer in Jesus left the city and crossed the Jordan River and went over to the Decapolis, largely to Pella, and not one believer died. Because Vespasian and Titus returned with 4 legions of soldiers. And they surrounded Jerusalem, and this time they didn't let people out. They didn't withdraw. They stayed there. They encamped around it. The city was weak in the north, and so they broke into the north, and people were killed. And so the zealots, you know what they do? They retreat into the temple. Apparently, Josephus talks about a prophecy goes out. God will protect us if we're in the temple. They're zealous. They're believers, hardcore. God will protect us. Titus says, don't destroy the temple. Most beautiful building on the earth, don't destroy that temple. They're fighting, and a soldier shoots a firebrand and it catches the cedar on fire, and pretty soon, boom, it goes up in flames, and all the gold and the silver melt. And it goes down into the rocks. And then the soldiers are in, and boy, they're just wiping everybody out. Josephus, we believe, is a big exaggerator. Most scholars believe that. But, he says 1 million people get killed. Probably not, but, that's what he says. But guess what happens? Remember I said that they had built that platform with those structural walls underneath it? And they pushed all those charred stones off the platform, and they fell. And I want you to look at that picture right there. They fall about 80 feet, and they hit that because that's not bedrock. I've walked underneath that. They've got it actually cleaned today. There's sewer lines going up. And in the time of Jesus, and see how it just crashed into it? All these stones. Now, the good stones got recycled, but these are all broken stones. And Josephus says the fire was so hot that the limestone inside the blocks boiled, and it, right? Exploded. You go down, you touch, they've only been uncovered for about 30 years, by the way. They're covered up with debris, but now you can actually walk down and touch fulfilled prophecy, because those are stones thrown down in fulfillment of Jesus' prophecy. Not one stone will be left upon another. And you can see the fire marks on them. It's exciting. Can't tell? Pretty exciting to go down and touch that because it's fulfilled prophecy. Jesus said not one stone, and there they were. Good stones got recycled in other buildings, but these got left there, and then the debris came in, and about 70 feet of debris was covering it up, and now they've been excavated. So Jewish people come to that western wall because it's a structural wall. There's nothing on the other side of that. It's not solid is what I'm trying to say, because there was just that rock that was there before, and I had to build out. Here, this will help you understand. I shot these pictures underneath. We got our cameras down under that several years ago. You can actually see these are Herodian stones going up, and the arches, all built by King Herod. It's called Solomon's Stables, and so the Crusaders actually used it for stables for horses. Today it's an overflow mosque for the Al-Aqsa Mosque. There you can see the little ashlar mark around Herod's stones there and how he built them. There's another fabulous place that was just discovered in the Jewish quarter. It's a priestly workshop. It's called the Burnt House, actually destroyed. Can you see the ash? You see the ash? You can actually see, I can see pieces of wood down in there. It was a priestly workshop, burned in AD 70. And one of the things they found that was so stunning was this Roman spear. And so this is a place that the priestly family, I believe it was Captros' family, were actually consumed there. When Titus destroyed Jerusalem, he took the booty of the Jewish temple and he went back to Rome. And he used that booty to build a building down by a colossal statue of Nero. And the name stuck, Colosseum. That's where the name comes from, okay? But he took the Jewish temple instruments, and that's what he used to build the Colosseum. Well, he had a great show as he went back, became emperor, and that's in Titus's arch there in the Roman Forum. Well, 62 years later, something happens. What do? There's no temple. Can't sacrifice. What are you going to do? So a rabbi develops. He's the leading rabbi. Google him tonight if you're not familiar with him. His name is Akiva, Rabbi Akiva. He invents modern Judaism. He transitions from the temple and sacrifice to synagogue and prayer. And he anoints a man whose name is Simon Bar Kokhba, is Simon Bar Kokhba. Bar is son, Kokhba star. Simon, the son of the star, in fulfillment of Balaam's prophecy, the star would come out of Jacob. Anoints him as Messiah, puts him on a white horse, leads him through the streets of Jerusalem, proclaiming him to be the Messiah. He's the first people to see my new coin. This is a Bar Kokhba coin right here. It's got a lyre or a harp on it, the symbol of Israel. There's one I want to buy. It's about $15,000. I don't have it. But it's got the temple because they were planning to build the temple again. Well, here you can see some of these other coins, some with a temple on it. And that one was kind of cracked. I actually got it from a member of the Knesset. But anyway, here you can see the temple, and he prints on that the freedom of Israel. He's anointed as Messiah. Wow. Well, it doesn't go set very well in Rome, and so this guy named Hadrian decides he's going to come and put down this rebellion. And this time he's not going to put down the rebellion. They don't want any more Jewish problems over here at all. So this time he doesn't just destroy the city like Titus did. He scrapes it down to bedrock. So when you walk in the old streets of Jerusalem, most of the time you're walking on second century stuff, not from the time of Jesus. Now it's interesting, this Messiah anointed by the leading rabbi of the age who invents modern Judaism, Akiva, his Messiah dies with a sword in his hand. Contrast that with Jesus, who dies on the cross saying, "My kingdom is not of this world." Two paths, two directions. Hadrian will call the new city not Jerusalem. He doesn't want to call it Jerusalem. He's not going to call it Judah. He's going to call it Palestinia. You know where that comes from? Philistinia, Philistines. It's a Philistine land. It's not Jewish land. He builds it. His name is Aelius, so it's the new capital. And on the Temple Mount, he puts a temple to Jupiter with a statue of himself in it. And he tells Jewish people, if you come to this city, we'll kill you. You can't come here. And so Jews have really been banned, with the exception of 3 or 4 years during the reign of Julian the Apostate, from openly worshiping in Jerusalem since 135 AD until 1967. Okay? So Jewish people would come and they would lament, and they would lament the destruction of their temple and their city. And it's on the 10th of Av, and it's usually in July. And Never forget one of the first times I was there. I didn't quite understand what was going on. It was in July. I don't go to July anymore, but anyway, there in July, and there were no chairs. People were laying around. And then somebody would go read something, and they'd beat themselves. Somebody else would read something, They're wailing, reading Lamentations and Jeremiah about the destruction of the temple. Very moving. Only holiday or a holy day you can take pictures down at the temple is that day. That's why Westerners would come, and they only had allowed Jews to come one day a year through the centuries. Christians, by the way, as well as Muslims. And they would wail on that 10th of Av. They'd beat themselves, and so that's why they call it the Wailing Wall. So I don't call it the Wailing Wall, they call it the Western Wall or the holy place. But that's why they would come. Well, Helena comes 2 centuries later, the mother of Constantine, and she's pointed to this place where Hadrian had built a temple to Venus, and she builds the Church of the Holy Sepulchre there. This is where the Christians said that Jesus was crucified. Hadrian had built a temple to Venus there, and she builds that church. In 614, the Persians come. They're called the Parthians. They come and they butcher all the Christians. They destroyed the city. They butcher all the Christians, 60,000 Christians. Terrible time. And so they're really weakened. 15 years later, the Christians retake the city. But then they're so weakened that 8 years after that, an Arab army comes from Arabia, and the Muslims are at the gate, and we have the word jihad, struggle. And it's going to go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And so the Muslims had developed this idea that Muhammad the prophet had gone to heaven from that rock. We believe this is the rock that Solomon's temple would have been on, and Herod's temple would have been on, a high place. In the next century, Omar will actually build this beautiful building of Persian tiles and golden dome to commemorate Muhammad's heavenly ascent. That's not a mosque, by the way, it's a shrine. There's a mosque just to the south of it called the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which means the faraway mosque. But this is a beautiful shrine that they built over that. Do you know how the Christians treated this area, by the way? A garbage dump. They said, we're going to let this be a perpetual testimony of the Jews rejecting Jesus. Very interesting. Well, there's a Muslim guy named Hakim, and he chops down the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. He begins killing all the women and raping, they would let the women be raped. And so this is what launches the crusade. You're going to hear a lot of things about the crusades. Crusades are launched because of what Hakim is doing to believers in Jerusalem and in the Holy Land. And that launches the crusades, and the crusaders will come and they'll take Jerusalem to be a Christian city and back and forth. But then a guy by the name of Salah ad-Din will capture the city in 1187 from Tikrit, by the way, same place Saddam Hussein will be from. Very interesting. The current walls go back to the 16th century. They're Ottoman or Turkish, and they conquer the city, and the Ottoman Turks will reign over there for about 400 years. It's called Al-Quds by the Muslims. It means the Holy One. And it's holy, as I said, because they believe Muhammad went to heaven from there. About a third of a mile is another holy rock. It's the rock that believers in Jesus believe that he was put into and came back to life. And so there's an upper story chapel. This is an Orthodox chapel, so there's no statues there. There are icons, and you can actually reach down and feel the Golgotha rock, where most believers believe that would be Golgotha. It was kind of an inferior type of stone there, and we'll talk about it some more later in the week, because it was a quarry, and they didn't quarry that stone. Jews come here because they're mourning the loss of the temple and how it was destroyed. And so this is why these three monotheistic religions are attracted to the city of Jerusalem. They come, they have connections back to Abraham, but there are such differences, aren't there? And so it's moving to go there and to see people worshiping. But I want to tell you, Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's praying, not my will, but your will be done. He's then led down this 2nd century BC stairway, a Hasmonean stairway. He goes down that to the Garden of Gethsemane, then he's brought back up that stairway, and here's the traditional palace of Caiaphas. Can't say it is his palace, but some very good evidence for it being that. To be the courtyard where John and Peter were warming themselves, and then there was a little place where Jesus would have been in the pit to be tried. And so we think about Jesus being tried and going through these trials that night, and he's sent over ultimately to Pilate. And Pilate, of course, the Roman governor, washes his hands and says, I find no fault in this man, yet he sends him out carrying his cross. and he would go to Jerusalem. I don't believe in the 14 stations of the cross. I think it's a whole different thing, but that's a different story. But it all ends up here because this is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This church destroyed twice by earthquake, destroyed twice, I should say, and shaken by over 50 earthquakes. You can see the two chapels. That's that upper chapel of Calvary we talked about. And there's a moving mosaics describing this. Here you can come and see the tomb of Jesus. The tomb of Jesus has recently been cleaned, and very interesting stuff on National Geographic if you're interested in looking at the details of that. This Hakim chopped down the tomb of Jesus. So this is actually more Tsar from Russia, put this white marble on there. And they went in, by the way, the slide was just there, they broke the stone over Jesus' tomb so they wouldn't use that stone in other buildings. Saladin allowed the Christians to have access to their sites. So this guy's great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents were appointed by Saladin to lock the Church of the Holy Sepulchre every night and to open it every morning to say, we give you Christians access to your places. Very interesting. So if you hang out there at night, you can actually see him go up on the ladder, and then he does something interesting. He puts the ladder back inside so the Christians have control of when the door will be opened and shut. Very interesting. Yeah. And so this is that upper chapel of Calvary. There's the stone of unction down below. People think that this was that. It's been changed many times, so I'm not a believer in some of these things. Here you can see that stone was broken over the tomb of Jesus so they wouldn't use it in other places. When you go there, you see people from all kinds of backgrounds. You're Muslims that are there in the tomb of Jesus. And I'm always a skeptic, a left-brain guy, but these are actually first-century tombs that are in the Syrian chapel just behind the tomb of Jesus. So we know this was a first-century cemetery, right? And so there's great evidence to say this would be it. This is where Hadrian desecrated it. Emotionally, I like to go to the Garden Tomb. If you've been there, you probably like that too. Most Protestants, we call it the Protestant Calvary because we go over. But unfortunately, this tomb is actually an 8th century BC style of tomb. However, it's very moving to go. And when Charles Warren was staying with the Spaffords in the American colony, he looked out and he saw those eyes there. Can you see the eyes and the nose? And it looked like a skull, and he thought, this is Calvary. And they found that tomb down below. And so a lot of Protestants especially like to go there, and it's very peaceful and wonderful to go and meditate and think about the time of Jesus being there. But ultimately, it doesn't matter whether it's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre or the Garden Tomb. You know what matters is what it says. Now, unfortunately, they've taken this door down, but the door used to be there at the Garden Tomb, and it said, he is not here, for he is risen. There's no place there that claims to have the bones of Jesus. Right? Well, that little place was outside of Jerusalem, outside the Ginneth Gate, the Garden Gate. There's that little quarry. Jerusalem was the center of the world, and that was the first Bible lands map, and indeed it was. It means city of peace, but we've said not many cities subject to more war or bloodshed than that city. So we ask the question, will there be peace in Jerusalem? I pray for the peace of Jerusalem every day. I hope you do too. I pray for the peace, but I realize unless there's peace in the hearts of the people living in Jerusalem, there won't be peace in Jerusalem. As a matter of fact, there won't be peace in Bellingham either, will there? Unless there's peace in our hearts, there won't be peace in our families unless there's peace in our hearts. And so I'm praying for the individuals who live there. But I do know that John concludes the book of Revelation by saying, I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, now the dwelling of God is with men, and he will live with them, and he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. And there'll be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. Isn't that beautiful? So I know there'll be a new Jerusalem, but I'm praying also for the peace of this Jerusalem. But I realize it's not just Jews and Arabs or Jews and Muslims or Jews and Christians. Our hearts have to be transformed. We need heart transplants, don't we? Now, is this the New Jerusalem? It's interesting when Augustine of Hippo, the early Latin church father, wrote a book called The City of God. Constantine had come in, and now the church is elevated to the palace of the Caesars, and he writes a book in the thesis, says, this is the New Jerusalem. And yet, it hasn't lived up to his name, has it? Either through the church or through the city. And so we pray for that. Now, when I go over to the Mount of Olives, to that little church, the Dominus Flevit Church, here's what I like to do. You see that? Isn't that beautiful? And if you just get there just right, you can have the only thing that can bring peace to Jerusalem is the cross of Jesus Christ. And so I'm praying that they'll come to know Jesus as their Lord and Savior, and I want to pray that for you as well. Let's pray together. Father in heaven, thank you tonight for this opportunity to drift away to a faraway time and place. Find ourselves in Jerusalem. We find ourselves pondering the people who've been there through the ages. What a long history. And we realize, and we want to have peace there, but we realize they need peace in their hearts. So we pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We pray for individuals. We pray that Jews and Arabs and Christians can all come to know you in some way and find peace and forgiveness in their hearts. I want to pray for the people who are here tonight also, that we can have peace in our hearts and forgiveness toward others. You can bring healing in our lives in this town of Bellingham, in this state of Washington, in our country, and around the world. So Jesus, we invite you into our lives just now, and we thank you for hearing our prayer in your precious name. Amen.